And now that we're hearing a lot about, geoeconomics, everything, we are also hearing an increasing number of members of Trump administration and of Australian government, and even some of the MPs in the UK criticizing the World Health Organization, or they're blaming China for all of this. Some politicians even go so far to call it the Wuhan virus. Why such rhetorical violence now? Do you think it's the beginning of a new Cold War, pitting Washington against Beijing? And if so, how can institutional investors be prepared and hopefully adjust to it?
It's a very good question, and yes. I think you put your finger on the most important issue here. And once again, let's beware of the theater. So really, it's not something recent. So most so-called experts are blaming it all on President Trump or on Chairman Xi Jinping in Beijing. And as you can see in that beautiful chart here, these trends pre-existed the crisis. So really, you have I think it's a slide that I used in London 7 weeks ago, and you have here on the left-hand side Tuco, who's a character from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And in a way, Tuco is the symbol of that new age of ultra-realism, which Professor Luttwak calls the age of geoeconomics, right? And of course, people may call it, a very cynical age. I don't think so. I think it's just realism. So what does it mean? It means viewing the world as it is, right? So, some people don't like the World Health Organization because they think it's close to China. Some people don't like the Chinese government because they think it's not democratic enough or too centralized. On the other hand, some people, don't like the US model because they think it's too capitalist or too greedy or whatever. All these moral labels are completely and highly uninteresting. So basically, and this is really the Edward Luttwak realist worldview. Or in France, we call it, the Richelieu Mazarin worldview. And in Italy, they may call it the Machiavellian worldview. So it's, what does it mean? If you're a realist, you don't try to judge governments or the CEOs of companies purely using, moral yardsticks. Mm-hmm. It is the recipe for disaster. So, if you're a financial journalist, you're listening to the CEO of a large listed company in the London Stock Exchange. If you're a policy analyst, you're listening to President Trump or to Chairman Xi Jinping. If you start using moralistic labels, it's not good, doesn't work. So being a realist is just seeing the world as it is. Mm-hmm. And the rise of China, of course, it didn't happen yesterday. Mm-hmm. It has been happening for the past 25 years, slowly but surely. And maybe 4 or 5 years ago, there was an acceleration in the relative rise or the relative importance of China on the world stage, both in terms of economic mass and political influence. And maybe in the past 12 or 9 months, the acceleration accelerated, right? Mm-hmm. And so now with the Corona crisis, people are saying, oh my God, there is a new Cold War between Beijing and Washington. It's really bad, it's horrible. Why can't we just hug each other and love each other, right? So these people are imbeciles. So in the real world, it doesn't work that way. So we don't need to judge the White House using pseudo-moralistic, yardstick, and we don't need to criticize the Chinese government because we don't like the way their policy making is organized internally. It's their problem, not ours. Mm-hmm. So as rational analysts, we need to view the world in a cold, Cartesian, rational way. So of course, that rise of China has an impact on the standing of Europe and the US. Mm-hmm. That rise of China has a profound impact on emerging markets across the greater Eurasian continuum. And the greater Eurasian continuum really starts in Manchester or Dublin and stretches to Tokyo. And this is really the playground for China's ambitions. It's neither good nor bad. It is a reality, right? So every time, there are Chinese investors, including Chinese sovereign funds and Chinese state-owned banks, every time, the management of Chinese state-owned banks or Chinese civil engineering companies, they fly to, Trieste or Napoli or Athens, you have some idiots panicking in Berlin or Brussels saying, oh my God, Chinese are coming, they're taking over Europe's, ports. Or this is really shallow and stupid. They're not coming to take over Europe's ports. It's a natural geo-economic development. And if there are peoples in Brussels or Berlin who are maybe unhappy about that, they shouldn't say, oh my God, and lecture us. Perhaps they should give more money to the Italians and the Greeks. So perhaps if the EU or the Germans gave more financial and economic resources to people in Trieste, Napoli, or Athens, they wouldn't need to call upon Chinese state-owned civil engineering and contracting firms. So what I mean is these are natural developments, and they have to be realized and acted upon in a rational way. And so from that perspective, I'll just conclude on that. From that perspective, basically, ironically, even though they look like rivals, even though they seem to be rivals or so-called enemies, in many ways, President Trump and Chairman Xi Jinping, they speak the same language. It's the language of Professor Ludwig. It's an ultra-realist geo-economic language, which means that they view finance, economics, international law, and politics as one. They don't separate, on the one hand, politics or geopolitics, and on the other hand, financial and industrial and economic issues. For them, it's a unified playground. And they want the best for their countries. So, I'm sure that, President Xi Jinping wants the best for China, and I hope, and I think that in most instances, President Trump seems to want the best for America, and I think it's good. If people are selfish, in a certain way, it's good, but we have to realize that's how they operate, and we have to operate ourselves here in Europe, in Britain or Europe, on the same basis. We shouldn't be naive or excessively idealistic. We should take the world as it is, and that's what I mean by the age of geoeconomics.